What if every coincidence you shrugged off as luck was actually the universe answering you in a language you can learn? Imagine your life not as an endless stream of random noise, but as a conversation, sometimes whispered, sometimes blunt, between an inner state and the world outside. That is the single disruptive idea we'll dwell in. Apparent chance is often meaning in disguise. And if you learn to read the signs, you can steer your attention and your feeling in ways that change what turns up. Most of us have a dozen small uncanny moments lodged in memory. The friend you'd been thinking of who suddenly calls, the exact phrase that appears on a billboard the morning you need it, the dream image that shows up in waking life 2 days later. We treat these as curiosities, good anecdotes for the dinner table. But two thinkers from different centuries, Carl Jung, the clinician who named the phenomenon synchronicity, and Neville Goddard, the 20th century teacher who offered hands-on experiments, approached these coincidences as evidence. Evidence that an inner process is participating in the shaping of outer events. Jung brought a diagnostic, clinical frame to the phenomenon. Neville offered a laboratory of practice. Together, they sketch a map. Messages arrive, sometimes they warn, sometimes they confirm, sometimes they announce what is becoming. Consider the most famous clinical vignette Jung used, a patient who dreamt of a shining scarab, an insect that in her culture symbolized rebirth. And at that precise moment, a beetle tapped the window in Jung's consulting room. Jung did not call it supernatural. He called it meaningful and synchronistic, an external event that matched an internal image with uncanny timing. This was not mere coincidence in Jung's view. It was a meaningful alignment, the psyche and the outer world intersecting at a point of significance. Neville, decades later, would describe similar alignments not as psychological curiosities, but as the bridge of incidents, small external confirmations that form when an imagined state is held with feeling until the world arranges itself to match. For Neville, those taps on the glass are not random knocks. They are the footsteps on a bridge being built between an inner conviction and its outward expression. You may be skeptical, and that's appropriate. Any useful map must also show the limits of the territory. These ideas are not promises of effortless control. They are invitations to experiment, cautiously and responsibly, with the craft of attention. The language we will use is tentative when it needs to be. May, can, often, because the psyche is not a machine you operate with a button. But neither is it passive. There is a responsiveness here, subtle and teachable, that you can practice. Imagine a scene that will recur through this talk. A woman steps into her bedroom late at night, shoulders tight from a day she wishes to rewrite. She sits on the edge of the bed and breathes slowly until the world becomes thinner and softer. In that semi-awake space, she replays the event she dislikes, but this time she edits the ending, letting her internal camera show the moment as she would have liked it. She brings the scene to life with texture, the warmth of hands, the cadence of a voice, the ache melting into relief. And she keeps the feeling at the center, gratitude, peace, a settled certainty that this is true already. Then she lets herself go to sleep. The days that follow are not a straight line to the rewritten scene, but she notices small nudges. A text that arrives at the precise hour she imagined, a conversation that unexpectedly softens, a door opening she had not expected. These are the bridge of incidents moments Neville described, and you will learn how to recognize and cultivate them. Before we go deeper, one small step of engagement. If the idea that your life sends and receives messages resonates with you, drop one word in the comments below that names the shift you're claiming right now. A single word like clarity, courage, or home. That word isn't a magic formula. It's a thread that helps you notice what matters. To understand why these moments matter, let's look at how Jung and Neville framed the same mystery from different angles. Jung, speaking from the consulting room and the laboratory of dreams, noticed patterns in his patients, clusters of meaningful coincidences that could not be dismissed as statistical flukes. In Jung's account, such events point to archetypal dynamics, deep, shared images and processes in the collective unconscious, momentarily manifesting in the outer world to carry meaningful information to an individual. He used the scarab story and similar cases to show that psyche and matter can meet with telling precision. Neville Goddard, writing and teaching in the mid-20th century, did not dispute Jung's observations. He moved them toward practice. Where Jung named and described, Neville experimented and prescribed. Neville's core claim was simple and radical in its plainness. Imagination is creative, and feeling gives that imagination force. If you can assume the feeling of an intention already fulfilled and hold it long enough and vividly enough, the outer world will begin to supply confirmation. He called the pattern of confirmations the bridge of incidents. They are a sequence of outward events, people, words, objects, even numbers, that cluster to support the inner state you guard. Neville's students reported striking episodes. A single telephone call that resolved a long-standing problem. A manuscript accepted after a period of imagined success. The sudden arrival of a person who had not existed the day before. These were not promised, they were reported as outcomes of particular repeatable practices. Two types of evidence meet here: Jung's documented clinical oddities and Neville's collection of applied testimonies. What binds them is the consistent shape of the phenomenon. An image or conviction appears inside, a feeling energizes it, and the outer world aligns in small ways first, its breadcrumbs, then larger ones. The scientific language we sometimes borrow, observer effect, collapse of possibility, field response, can be helpful as metaphor. It gives us an image of a system that is sensitive to intention. But we must be careful. Metaphors are not proofs. Quantum experiments in physics do not by themselves validate metaphysical claims about conscious will over macroscopic events. They suggest analogies that can illuminate, not shortcuts that prove. Keep the analogy gentle, useful for thinking, not for asserting. To begin to see how this works in practical terms, listen to 3 illustrative accounts that bridge the clinical and the experimental. The first comes from Jung's file, the patient who dreamt of a scarab beetle, and then, in a moment that was as precise as it was uncanny, a beetle tapped the window of the consulting room. Jung treated this as meaningful synchrony, a signal from the collective imagery that intersected with the personal process of transformation. That tapping beetle arrested attention and created a moment of insight that words alone might not have produced. The second story moves into Neville's territory, a man in financial stress who adopted Neville's practice of living from the end. He would lie down each night and imagine himself counting money in a richly detailed scene, the feel of the paper, the ledger's texture, the sense of relief washing over him. He did not do this as a frantic chant, but with steady attention until the feeling settled as if the relief were already true. Over weeks, small events began to shift. A late invoice paid, a forgotten check arriving, a creditor's tone softening. It wasn't a single miraculous fix. It was a sequence of incidents that together gave the impression that the inner state had found outward counsel. The third account is straightforward and instructive. A secretary who wanted a promotion. She practiced the hypnagogic rehearsal Neville taught. In the dim hours before sleep, she would imagine receiving the notice, hearing the congratulatory tone, feeling the weight of a new key in her hand and the warmth of approval in the room. She kept the sensory detail vivid, the color of the envelope, the cadence of a colleague's voice, and ended the rehearsal with gratitude. She avoided anxiety afterward. She did not check obsessively. Some weeks later, when an opportunity arose within the office, a chain of events unfolded that placed her in a favorable position. She later attributed the shift to the steady felt assumption she maintained nightly and to the bridge of small confirmations that followed. These stories share a form, an internal image taken as real, felt vividly, and sustained without frantic monitoring. The outer events that follow are not necessarily sudden miracles. They are confirmations that often begin small. A phrase overheard, a person showing up at the right moment, a number recurring, and then accumulate, like stones laid one after another into a crossing. We can speak more precisely about the heart of the mechanism now, because practical work depends on clarity. Think of imagination as the shaping faculty. It provides form, a scene, a picture, an end state. Feeling is the energizing faculty. It supplies the force that gives the imagined form weight. When imagination and feeling are combined with consistency, the field of possibilities around you begins to respond. This field might be described in many metaphors: a psychological field, an informational matrix, a subtle responsiveness of events to sustained inner states. The crucial, testable part of the idea is procedural. If you consistently imagine a desired state with sensory richness and keep feeling as if it is already true, you will tend to notice correspondences in your experience that align with that state. One reason the hypnagogic state, that hazy threshold between waking and sleep, is so important is that your critical thinking apparatus relaxes then. In the fully awake mind, the watchman asks questions, finds contradictions, and often prevents the imagination from holding a scene convincingly. In the half-asleep margin, the watchman slumbers. The scene you create then can be accepted by your deeper consciousness in a way it often isn't during the day. That acceptance is what Neville referred to as living from the end. You inhabit the psychological reality of the fulfilled desire long enough for it to register in the deeper parts of you that influence outward behavior and perception. Here is a concrete step-by-step outline you can test tonight if you wish, a clear enactment of Neville's hypnagogic practice adapted into simple stages. This is not a guarantee. It is an experimental protocol. Follow it with curiosity. Begin by choosing a single, specific outcome you wish to experience. Keep it small enough to test in days or weeks, not large enough to overwhelm your capacity for subtle attention. Create a restful ritual before bed. Dim the lights, silence notifications, allow 20 to 30 minutes of quiet. Lie down in a comfortable position where you can easily drift to sleep. Run a brief revision of the day. Mentally scan events that did not go as you wished. For each one, imagine it happening differently. Tenderly rewrite the ending. Do this with compassion. Do not force fantasy that feels false. Select one short scene that represents the fulfilled state you want. Keep it simple and sensory. If you seek a promotion, imagine opening the letter, hearing the sound of congratulations, feeling the texture of a new badge. If you want a healed relationship, imagine a specific forgiving exchange, the feel of two hands unclenching, the tone of reconciliation. Enter the scene as if watching a film, then step into it. Allow the sensory details to saturate, the warmth in the room, the weight of breath, the color of objects, the timbre of voices. Hold the feeling, the central emotion of the wish fulfilled, for as long as it remains natural. The feeling is the fulcrum: gratitude, relief, deep peace, or quiet triumph. When your attention thins and sleep approaches, let the scene fade gently, but keep the feeling as the thread you carry into sleep. Do not scour the world for confirmation afterward. Practice non-attached observation. If you find yourself doubting, return to a soft, steady endorsement. This is consistent with my inner certainty, not as a mantra of coercion, but as a quiet reminder. Record observations the next day. Note small confirmations without forcing interpretation. a conversation that matched a line in your imagined scene, a number that recurred, an unexpected person who checked in. These are the bridge materials. Track them attentively but without obsession. Over time, patterns often appear, clusters of related incidents that suggest the inner state is being mirrored. A few cautions. Do not aim for manipulation. The technique is not a tool to control other lives or dictate outcomes that infringe on choice. Also, watch for the trap of anxious monitoring. Checking obsessively weakens the felt assumption and invites conflict. Finally, results vary. Some people notice changes within days. Others see a slower rearrangement. Consistency and naturalness of feeling matter more than intensity born of desperation. Now, to ground the method in observation, let's return to the taxonomy of synchronicities, a practical sorting tool that helps you decide how to interpret and respond when a sign appears. We can divide most of these meaningful coincidences into 4 functional types. The categories are not rigid boxes, but guides: warning, confirmation, prophetic, and manifestation. A warning is a synchronicity that appears early and demands caution. It often has a numinous quality that stops you in your tracks, a sudden uneasy image, a recurring sign that makes you pause. Warnings tend to alert you to a possible harm or misalignment and often require immediate interior work. Stop, reassess, revise. For example, an unexpected dream of a door slammed in your face may precede a literal rupture in a relationship if not attended to. The classical response is not fear, but attention. Treat the sign as an invitation to alter course or mend what must be mended. A confirmation is a gentle nod from the field. These are the low-grade signals that indicate you're on the right track. The phone ringing with the name you pictured, a stranger repeating the exact phrase you rehearsed, a chance meeting that accelerates a plan. Confirmations do not demand grand action. They require reinforcement of your inner state, gratitude, persistent assumption, and increased non-reactive attention. Prophetic synchronicities carry the feeling of foretelling. They often arrive as vivid dreams, symbolic images, or strong intuitions that later unfold in a recognizable way. These can be exhilarating, but also dangerous if treated as certainty. Prophecy, in this sense, is a possibility enacted inwardly that later finds outer form. The ethical posture here is humility. Note the occurrence, test it against other evidence, and remain flexible about how it might express. Manifestation synchronicities are sequences of incidents that constitute the bridge Neville described, a cluster of events that collectively construct something new in the world, a job, a relationship, a tangible shift. These are the outcomes people most often notice because they are visible and consequential. Yet they are typically the cumulative result of many small confirmations, not a single miraculous event. To illustrate each category briefly with familiar echoes from the archive, the scarab that tapped the window can function as a prophetic or numinous confirmation, depending on the context of the patient's inner life. The secretary's promotion is a clear example of manifestation arising from nightly rehearsals, a bridge of incidents forming in support of an inner assumption. The man who visualized Barbados and later received the job there, the Barbados story, straddles prophetic and manifestational qualities, an inner itinerary crystallized into an external opportunity. As you learn to categorize, 2 practical skills develop: recognition, noticing when something might be a sign, and response, knowing what action, revision, gratitude, pause, deeper assumption is appropriate. Recognition requires a sensibility for clusters. One beetle on the window might amuse you. A beetle that appears as a recurring motif in dream and daylight, paired with an inner image you've been holding, becomes meaningful. The field tends to answer patterns more reliably than isolated incidents. This is where learning to read symbols matters. Objects, numbers, animals, and even mundane phrases can function as punctuation in the conversation between inner state and the outer world. Repeated numbers may feel like a code: 222, 555, 999. These are not universal keys, but prompts to notice what you were thinking or feeling when they appeared. An animal, a bird on the sill, a dog crossing your path, can be an emblem suited to your personal narrative. The art is to avoid the two extremes, either attributing every trivial occurrence to cosmic messaging or dismissing all meaningful signs as mere chance. The middle path is attentive curiosity. Treat a repeating detail as a potential clue, not a verdict. Even with this categorization, the central practice remains the same. Cultivate a sustained inner state that prefigures the outcome you seek. Use the hypnagogic hours and revision techniques to impress that state. And then moderate your attention in waking life so you can see the bridge of incidents as it forms without smothering it. The field responds to steadiness. Like a garden, it rewards repeated, gentle tending more than feverish one-off efforts. We have now brushed the theoretical frame and given a clear set of simple, testable steps for the hypnagogic moment. In the continuation of this conversation, we will walk deeper into the taxonomy, unpack more of the diagnostic signs that distinguish projection from genuine numinosity, and practice a guided rehearsal you can use tonight. We will also return to a couple of the longer case histories, the Barbados appointment and the scarab moment, and unpack them as templates you can mirror in your own life, not as guarantees, but as instructive patterns. For now, keep the following in mind. Your inner life is not a private rehearsal with no impact. It is a participant in the shaping field around you. That participation often announces itself through tiny, telltale coincidences. Your task is to learn the language, to maintain the feeling behind the image, and to act with curiosity and restraint when the field answers. When you do, the bridge of incidents may begin to appear, slowly, sometimes blatantly, sometimes as a quiet cluster that only you can read. We are about to step into a set of diagnostic tools for reading those clusters, and a short practice that will let you test the approach tonight. But first, a deeper consideration of how symbols work and how to avoid mistaking your own projections for true signals will give you the discernment you need. A deeper consideration of symbols and how to avoid mistaking your own projections for true signals will give you the discernment you need. Symbols dress themselves in everyday clothes. A repeating number, a stray animal at the window, a sentence that keeps appearing in different contexts. These are all garments a signal might wear. But before you start reading everything as a telegram, learn to test the signal for three qualities that reliably separate projection from numinosity. First, timing. Does the symbol appear at moments that relate meaningfully to an inner state you've been sustaining? Second, clustering. Does this sign arrive alone, or does it come with companions? A phrase, a person, an event that echoes the same theme. Third, affective charge. Does the sighting carry a felt significance in your body, a tightening or a release that is not merely thought about but felt? When you notice a recurring number, ask yourself, what was I doing or feeling the first time it drew my attention? If the same feeling threads through later encounters, you may be seeing something more than chance. We are about to step into a set of diagnostic tools for reading those clusters, and a short practice that will let you test the approach tonight. But first, a deeper consideration of how symbols work, and how to avoid mistaking your own projections for true signals will give you the discernment you need. A deeper consideration of symbols, and how to avoid mistaking your own projections for true signals will give you the discernment you need. Symbols dress themselves in everyday clothes. A repeating number, a stray animal at the window, a sentence that keeps appearing in different contexts. These are all garments a signal might wear. But before you start reading everything as a telegram, learn to test the signal for three qualities that reliably separate projection from numinosity. First, timing. Does the symbol appear at moments that relate meaningfully to an inner state you've been sustaining? Second, clustering. Does this sign arrive alone, or does it come with companions? A phrase, a person, an event that echoes the same theme. Third, affective charge. Does the sighting carry a felt significance in your body, a tightening or a release that is not merely thought about but felt? When you notice a recurring number, ask yourself, what was I doing or feeling the first time it drew my attention? If the same feeling threads through later encounters, you may be seeing something more than chance. Take the scarab story again as an instructive template. The patient had held a dream image that resonated with deep psychological material, rebirth, mourning, something in the soul wanting to be transformed. The beetle's tap did not matter because it was unusual. It mattered because it matched an inner trajectory already in motion and arrived at a threshold where the patient could receive its meaning. That match creates an opening. If you see a bird once outside your window and feel nothing significant, it is rarely worth overinterpretation. If the bird arrives repeatedly around moments of decision and each time settles your chest or sharpens an image in your mind, then it has become an index of something larger. Clustering is rarely dramatic. More often, it is built from a series of small related confirmations. A phrase in a book, then the same phrase overheard, then a person entering your life who embodies the tone of the phrase. Neville referred to these as the bridge of incident stones. Jung recognized similar patterns in the archetypal echoes his patients reported. Learn to follow the small trail, not because every pebble matters, but because patterns reveal intention more reliably than isolated coincidences. Symbols also have personal grammars. The number 222 might mean synchronicity for one person and nothing for another. A fox might symbolize cunning for someone who grew up reading a certain mythology and represent misdirection for someone else. Your task is not to memorize a universal code, but to learn your own symbolic dialect. Keep a simple log, brief, private, of repeating numbers, images, animals, and phrases, noting the thoughts and feelings you had when they first appeared. Over weeks, your log will often reveal whether a symbol is a wallpaper of cultural patterning or a directed message. Now let's unpack more of the diagnostic tools you can use in the field when a signal appears. Imagine you are walking through your week and something odd happens. A piece of music cuts through a conversation and echoes a dream, or a stranger hands you a receipt with a number that matches a page you had bookmarked. Pause. Do not immediately commit to a decision. Run a quick 3-step interior test. Attend, contextualize, and respond. Attend by noticing the bodily reaction. Contextualize by asking what inner state this might be speaking to: fear, longing, correction, confirmation. Respond by choosing one measured action consistent with the category you discern. If it holds as a warning, revise and slow. If it reads like confirmation, reinforce with gratitude and steady assumption. If prophetic, note and watch with ethical caution. If manifestational, steward the opportunity. To make these diagnostic moves practical, let me give you a handful of short templates you can use silently in moments of uncertainty. If something feels like a warning, say to yourself, quietly, not as a spell, but as an orientation, pause. What needs changing here? Then take one small corrective action: a phone call to clarify, a boundary affirmed, a gentle conversation initiated. If the sign feels like a confirmation, practice the opposite of frantic checking. Hold the feeling again for a minute, breathe, and offer quiet gratitude. Gratitude is not superstition. It is a psychological seal that keeps your attention aligned with the state you want. If the sense is prophetic, treat it as a possibility, not a decree. Note it in your journal, but do not reorder your life around an unverified forecast. If it feels manifestational, begin to map practical steps, but without the urgency that collapses feeling into need. Those practical steps bring us to a central danger: misinterpretation born of desire. Our minds are eager story makers. We will always have the capacity to retrofit meaning onto events after the fact. The skill you are cultivating is not to eliminate patterning, you cannot and should not, but to become more honest in your reading. The simplest guard against wishful projection is to require at least 2 of the 3 signature qualities before you act dramatically: timing, clustering, and affective charge. 2 are a pattern. 3 is a signal with weight. With discernment sharpened, let's return to a closer look at the Barbados case and the businessman counting money case, because they illuminate different considerations about intention, ethical limitation, and tempo. The Barbados account in the archive is instructive because it shows how vivid, sustained itinerary and imagined travel and its sensory specifics sometimes precedes a nearly literal external arrangement. The man who imagined the island's heat, the smell of sea salt, the cadence of a local greeting, did so without forcing outcome. He practiced the inner scene daily and then pivoted when an opportunity presented itself, recognizing it without coercing it. That's the ethical posture I want to underline. Imagine clearly, but follow the outer cues with humility. The occasion that came to him had constraints: visas, job interviews, other people's choices, which is why the path from imaginary sea to actual flight was composed of many small alignments rather than one miraculous door opening. Contrast that with the businessman who would count money in his mind. His practice offers excellent insight into tempo and subtlety. He created sensory detail around the act of receiving payment, the weight and sound of notes, the scent of the office, the feel of his relief. Over time, his inner counting changed his perception. He noticed opportunities he would have otherwise missed and recalibrated his behavior in ways that improved his financial relations. Here again, the technique did not override obligations or magically erase debt. Instead, it shifted his attention, posture, and subsequent decisions in ways that produced different outer circumstances. That is a key ethical boundary. Techniques change the probabilities and the field of perception more than they coerce external agents. Now, practical extension. How to cultivate the seeing eye, the capacity to notice clusters early and escalate or withdraw attention appropriately. Begin with disciplined journaling. Each morning, take 5 minutes to record any unlikely coincidences from the previous day, along with the emotion you felt at the moment. In the evenings, scan these entries weekly. Patterns often reveal themselves after a few days, repeated themes, supporting incidents that create a chain. This simple habit trains your attention to find clusters without turning every event into a cosmic proclamation. Cultivating the seeing eye also means learning to widen your aperture. Many people fail to see the bridge of incidents because they are looking for an architect's sign, something huge and undeniable, when the universe usually prefers to scaffold through small acts. Notice metaphors as well. When you imagine an outcome, notice language that recurs in headlines, signs, or conversations. Language is often the thread that connects inner meaning to outer occurrence. If you imagine a gentle opening and then keep encountering the word open in surprising contexts, take note. Not as proof, but as a breadcrumb. Let's move now into an expanded, practical toolkit you can use for the hypnagogic window, for revision, and for daytime protection of feeling. These techniques must be sensory, gradual, and protective because feeling is both creative and vulnerable. The language here will be precise and step-by-step. Practice almost always rewards refinement more than force. Nightly hypnagogic ritual, extended script. Find a comfortable place in the dim light or darkness where you can lie down without interruption. Breathe slowly 3 times, feeling the torso rise and fall, as if the breath itself were settling the edges of the mind. Scan your body for tension and invite each held place, shoulders, jaw, stomach, to soften a fraction. Allow your eyelids to feel heavy. Let the edges of the room blur. Bring to mind a single specific scene that encapsulates the outcome you desire. Keep it under 1 minute long, a snapshot, not a whole movie. If it is a promotion, imagine holding a single envelope or hearing a specific phrase from your boss. If it is reconciliation, imagine one warm exchange and the feel of hands unclenching. Sensory detail matters: color, texture, temperature, specific sounds. Begin by watching the scene as if from a short distance. Notice the colors, the small noises, the crinkle of paper, the hum of a ceiling fan, the warmth of sunlight on a palm. After a few breaths, step into the scene. Feel the shoes on your feet, the weight of the envelope, the tone of the voice. Allow the central feeling, relief, gratitude, peace, to swell in the chest. Name the feeling quietly. Thankful or settled, not in a forced way, but as an acknowledgement. Hold that feeling with gentle steadiness. If the scene grows vivid, remain in it until the attention thins and sleep begins to come. If doubt intrudes, do not fight. Let the scene recede and return to the feeling alone. The temperature of the chest, the tilt of the head. The feeling is the thing that carries into the deeper self. The visual is the structure you use to produce it. When you must fall asleep, allow the last image to be the feeling itself, like a thread you carry into the dark. Let go of the need to check for confirmations in the night. The mind's role is to see the deeper layers. The world will answer in its own tempo. Revision technique, applied prompt. When an event during your day goes awry, you can use a short revision practice that shifts the memory's contour. Lie down or sit comfortably for 5 minutes. Identify the event and then imagine it again, this time editing for a more desirable ending. Keep the revision grounded in plausibility. Do not create fantasy that feels disconnected from your inner truth. Include one small sensory detail that differs from the original: the tone of voice, a word spoken differently, the placement of hands. As you replay the revision, hold the body's response, calmness replacing agitation, the center of the chest softening. End the revision with a short phrase of acceptance. This could have gone this way, and I rest in that peace. Record the revision in your journal. Over time, repeated, calm revisions often reduce the emotional intensity of past events and reshape how you perceive subsequent situations. Daytime protection, a small practice to guard feeling without becoming obsessive. Create a 2-minute anchor you can use when you notice anxiety creeping in. Stop what you're doing, slow your breath for 3 cycles, touch something solid, the table, the inside of your wrist, and re-anchor the feeling you are protecting with a soft phrase, steady. If intrusive thoughts return, return to the breath and say the phrase again. Do not attempt to force the scene back immediately. Protection is about stabilizing the affect so it does not collapse under contradiction. This small ritual might look simple, but when repeated, it prevents the erosion of the inner assumption. Troubleshooting common decays. What to do when doubt, impatience, or contradictory facts erode feeling. Doubt is the most patient enemy. It does not announce itself as a formidable foe. It creeps in as an undercurrent of worry. When you notice it, treat it as data, not a moral failure, but a signal to return to technique. Reduce intensity. Increase gentleness. Shift the practice from pushing to tending. Revisit smaller scenes that once felt easy to hold. Remember Neville's instruction to feel the wish fulfilled, not to control outcomes. If an outer event seems to contradict your assumption, avoid 2 mistakes. Do not double down with frantic intensity, and do not abandon the practice altogether. Instead, apply revision to the contradictory event. Stabilize the feeling through the daytime anchor, and continue the nightly rehearsal with the modesty of someone tending a fragile seed. Another trap is anxious monitoring, the compulsion to scan the outer world for proof. Paradoxically, the more you search, the less likely you are to see patterns because your attention is framed by lack. The remedy is practice non-attachment. Cultivate curiosity instead of desperation. If you find yourself checking for signs, wait a measured period, an hour, a day, and then journal any occurrences. The space between intention and evidence is often where the field does its subtle work. Let me also address the etiquette of other people's free will. These techniques are not tactics for coercing another person's choices. When relationships are involved, the field might align people who are willing and resonant. It does not override another's autonomy. Use imagination to change how you occupy a relationship, how you speak, how you hold boundaries, how you offer compassion, rather than to engineer another's decision. Ethical manifestation is always first about your own interior alignment and the behavior that alignment inspires. Now I want to help you recognize the 4 categories of synchronicities in practice with crisp, short templates you can apply immediately. When you notice a sign, ask, "Is this asking me to change direction?" If yes, treat as warning. "Is this confirming what I have been assuming?" If yes, reinforce. "Is this suggesting future unfolding without certainty?" If yes, note as prophetic. "Is this part of a sequence that points to a tangible outcome?" If yes, steward it as a manifestation. For each category, choose one adaptive response. Revise and pause for warning. Feel and thank for confirmation. Observe and test for prophetic. Plan and steward for manifestation. To help these categories land, here are additional micro-examples drawn from the archive, each followed by a simple recognition response template. These are not exhaustive, but practical. The ring and house pattern. A person dreams of a ring bright as a coin. Then several days later hears the word ring in a radio advertisement, and soon after finds themselves touring a house that contains a ring-shaped window. Recognition. Repeated motif centered on a personal value. Response. Honor the motif by asking which relationship or commitment it might be speaking to. Take one small clarifying action. The Golden Bear Teacher Story. A teacher keeps seeing images of golden bears in small ways. A toy on a student's desk, a sticker in a magazine, and after persistent attention, receives an unexpected invitation to lecture in a region associated with a bear team mascot. Recognition. Clustering that maps to a theme of recognition or visibility. Response. Prepare for visibility. Refine your message while staying humble. The scarab beetle moment. Recognition is the sudden match between deep inner imagery and an external, culturally resonant symbol. Response. Attend with curiosity. Allow insight to surface rather than forcing interpretation. Note and journal and see if action is required. Now, a brief guided exercise you can use right now. A 3 to 4 minute rehearsal you can do in a chair to practice the feeling-centered approach. Use this in the video as a live spoken mini guidance. Close your eyes if that is safe where you are. Take a slow breath in and let it out. Breathe again and feel the shoulders drop. Imagine a single small scene that would symbolize one step forward in the area you care about. Keep it compact, one sentence in your mind. Visualize just enough detail to make it feel true. A color, a sound, the weight of an object. As you hold the image, scan your body for the feeling that would accompany the scene's fulfillment. Let that feeling sit in the chest like warm light. Name it softly. Relief, welcome, quiet success. Breathe into that feeling twice. If a doubt washes up, let it pass like a cloud. Return to the feeling. Spend one more breath holding gratitude for the presence of this feeling, as if you are thanking a friend who has arrived. Open your eyes slowly. Carry the memory of the feeling for the rest of the hour and notice any small confirmations that appear. If you practice this little routine daily, you will find that the feeling becomes easier to access and the seeing eye grows more sensitive. Over weeks, the cluster habit forms. Integration. How to fold these practices into ordinary life without becoming sectarian about them. The aim is not to perform rituals that create separation, but to make your inner life more coherent with your outer choices. This means integrating small, digestible practices rather than embarking on dramatic life rewrites. The nightly hypnagogic rehearsal can be 5 to 30 minutes depending on your capacity. The daytime anchor, 2 minutes, is enough to stabilize feeling in meetings and conversations. The journaling habit need only be 5 minutes in the morning or evening. These are increments you can carry into a life with work, relationships, and obligations. Expect variability. Some projects respond quickly, Others reorganize slowly over months. The time frames depend on the complexity of the desire, the presence of contradictory internal states, and real-world constraints. When you do notice confirmation, treat it as evidence of movement rather than final proof. When nothing seems to change, return to the craft. Softer feeling, cleaner scenes, more attention to revision. A few final ethical and cautionary notes before we close. Do not frame these techniques as cures for illness, as guarantees for wealth, or as replacement for professional advice. They may change your perception and open doors, but they are not substitutes for medical care, legal counsel, or responsible financial planning. Also, beware of idolizing a teacher or technique. Neville Goddard's work is a powerful tool. It is not a cult. Use it critically, adaptively, and compassionately. We close by returning to the core reframe. Synchronicity and manifestation are two sides of the same mechanism. Jung gave us the diagnostic language to say that inner images can meet outer events with meaning. Neville gave us the laboratory practice to consciously cultivate the inner images and hold the feeling that tends to elicit confirmations. When you combine careful attention with steady feeling and ethical action, you enter into a collaborative process with the field of possibilities around you. The bridge of incidents is then not a superstition, but a small, testable hypothesis you live by experimenting gently and keeping honest records. Before the final word, a short checklist for immediate use tonight. Memory prompts you can keep at your bedside. 1. Choose a single specific scene you can imagine in under 60 seconds. 2. Keep the sensory palette limited: color, sound, texture. 3. Close with a feeling word and hold that feeling as you drift to sleep. 4. In the morning, log one small confirmation or note that nothing obvious happened. Both are useful data. 5. Repeat for at least a week before revising your method. If you resonated with the practice today, take a practical step. Save this video to revisit before bed for a week while you train the habit. Practice with kindness. Treat it as an experimental relationship with your attention. For those who want a deeper map, I have built an extended guide that expands the principles we discussed. Longer hypnagogic scripts, advanced revision modules, and a 12-week practice journal that helps you track clusters, sacred symbols, and tempo. The book is called Beyond the Frequencies. The link is pinned in the description for anyone who wants structured guidance and longer case studies. If you found value in this guide, subscribe to the channel to continue the work. The next video will be a focus session called Stop Losing Your Quantum Frequency, where we will practice maintaining feeling through long stretches of contradiction and cultivate resilience when the field seems silent. Remember, approach this as an experiment, not as a promise. Be curious, keep your ethics close, and practice with tenderness toward yourself and others. The universe may be answering you, but learning its language takes time. Tend the inner state that matters most, the one that carries quiet certainty and compassion, and notice how the tiny stones on the bridge begin to arrange themselves under your feet. If you chose a single word earlier and dropped it in the comments, clarity, home, courage, return to it tonight before sleep. Let it be the soft signpost of the feeling you carry into the hypnagogic edge. I'll see you in the next video, where we learn how to maintain that state in the face of daily contradictions and begin to recognize the field's voice in ever subtler ways. Thank you for listening, and may your attention be gentle, your imagination disciplined, and your heart open to the small confirmations that whisper directions when you most need them.